Welcome to the 22nd episode of the Rick Bisson Podcast.
Getting up there.
Yeah, super excited to have Todd Paige here with us today. And Todd is currently working with the World Wildlife Foundation. Fund, excuse me. I had corrected that too. It is the World Wildlife Fund. Thank you. And you are currently the Director, Communications,
that's
Seaweed and Shellfish Program Director.
Yep.
Is that about right?
That's about right.
Okay, great. And you're seeking stories and creating content among the grantees that amplify their inspiring messages of seaweed and shellfish farming and its positive impact on climate and coastal communities.
That's what I'm doing.
You previously served the pet and animal industry. You were at VACA, is it VACA or BCA? BCA Pet Cancer Center as a marketing chair. And you ran Paige Consulting Group for a number of years. And Senior Product Marketing and Commercialization Manager with IDEX Laboratories. And a colleague has said about Todd that you're energetic and a charismatic person. One of those people who is constantly coming up with new ideas and loves to think outside the box. That being said, she says he also understands the value of a well laid out plan and staying on task to meet goals. So there's Todd Paige in a nutshell. Yeah.
Yeah.
So great work background. And then at your current age, you found a new something.
Yeah, I did. I wasn't looking for it, but we had I had 30 years in the animal health industry. It was a phenomenal place to be. I think I started at IDEX in 89, maybe 88. In fact, I started with them because I had a design shop in Portland, and that was when I was doing graphic design, and I actually designed the IDEX logo, and it still stands today. So
that's amazing.
I
89
wish I had a penny for every time it was printed. But more recently, the VCA role was based in Santa Monica, which took us out there, and we thought we'd be there for quite some time. And it was a great experience. And then we came back from COVID because of COVID. We came back and we're hanging out, and then it just lingered and lingered. We stayed back longer and longer, and ended up giving up our apartment and finding winter rentals around here. But the out of the blue, I got a call about a year ago from a colleague that I used to work with at IDEX, and he had joined the WWF to promote seaweed and shellfish around the northern hemisphere in cold, deep waters. And he was looking for a communications person to help sort of tell those stories. So I said, yes, I made a job description, and the job description never made it past my desk. We had a great conversation, and after almost 10 minutes, probably, he did such a good job sort of making the argument. But a couple hours, we had sort of said, okay, I'm going to go for this. And it's been an amazing pivot for all sorts of reasons.
I'd like to get back to that a little bit later, but so when I look at what you're doing, and you'll talk about that, this will lead to that, I sort of think about people like Jacques Cousteau and Jack Hanna and Steve Irwin, who are out there amongst the wildlife.
Yep.
So tell us what you're doing out in the world.
It's being in those locations where we have grants that are promoting the advancing seaweed farming in different geographies. And we're focused primarily in English-speaking areas, the Pacific Rim, Eastern Pacific Rim, Alaska down to California, the coast of Maine and a little bit south, and then the Norway and around the UK. And those areas are good for growing large amounts of biomass in a short amount of time. And so what I'm doing is trying to just help promote their stories, because these are small organizations that don't have a marketing department. So we try to go and get footage of them in action, do interviews, create social stories, create sizzle reels to try to pitch to media, try to get the media to talk to them. So it's all about that type of work. It's really hyper focused on video and story content creation and collection. So that's part of it. The second half is a lot of executive producer type role of organizing them and planning them and getting them out the door.
It's beautiful.
It's been really lucky. It's a great culmination of everything I've done, and lands right in the sweet spot of where I think I fit best.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a lot of the 30 years at animal health, sort of you migrate around and you sort of figure out where you want to be. From I was running a creative shop to launching of products and doing a lot of data work. That's all really interesting, but this is really the sweet spot for me: visual communications and visual education.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a combination of my dad being a banker, my grandfather being a teacher, my mom being the artist, all that sort of blended together. And, it's here we are. The lineage sort of points you in the right direction.
Yeah. Funny how all those things all just come together.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really exciting. So tell us where you've kind of traveled and why that travel.
The travel is important to because we're, there's world in our name, World Wildlife Fund. We need to go where the projects are. And I'm also just an experiential learner, so I want to be there, hands-on, and learn. But the places we've been really support the work we're doing. So in Alaska, in the Faroe Islands, for example, that group up there, Ocean Rainforest, is demonstrating, even though it's within their harbors, that they can grow and maintain seaweed farms in really high energy waters. So the hope and expectation is with those learnings, we can get further offshore, out of the way, and that the learnings that they have will help that. So as part of that group, they have a U.S. presence as well, and off the Santa Barbara coast, they are just putting in the water now, a farm about 4 miles out for about I think it's a 3-year demonstration farm and it's the first farm that's in federal waters in the U.S. So that's kind of exciting.
Is that beyond the Channel Islands, or?
It's just along the line of them. So if you ever see those oil rigs out there, it's basically in line with that, and sort of at the northern point of that, generally speaking. And we were supposed to be out there next week or the week after, helping to film that. But they called and said, "Well, we're going to do it tomorrow," which is so we won't go there. But we'll go to the harvest and probably in August and see how that's going.
So explain a farm.
So a seaweed farm ranges from half an acre to a couple hundred acres, depending on where you are in the world. And just to reset, we've been farming, or civilization been farming seaweed for hundreds of years and generations in Asia, and it's very much part of their lifestyle, their social fabric, and their diet. What we're trying to do is bring it into areas where that isn't the case, and in order to do that, we need to really innovate, because the economics are very different. So work that we're doing in Alaska, for example, is really helping that whole state understand the opportunity they have to offset what might be a declining fishery and changing fishery up there, and mariculture, as they call it up there, as a real opportunity to sort of fill some of that void. And same in here in Maine, aquaculture has a chance to really fill in some of the gaps that the working waterfront and fishermen are seeing in some of their changing hauls and for all sorts of reasons. So I think I lost the first question.
Explain the farming.
What
does the farm look like?
The farm is relatively simple in that it is anchored to the ground, to the floor, and it has cables that come up to a network of rope on the surface that they then put seeded line attached the seeded line to, and the kelp just grows from those seeded lines. So and then there's some buoys around the navigational markers around the side. And then here in Maine, those farms usually go in the fall after Labor Day, and then they come out before Memorial Day.
Perfect.
So there may be some mooring at corners, but for the most part, those farms are gone. Shellfish stays in year round, but you can kayak over them. You can, I don't know if you can put a sunfish over them, but you can definitely kayak through them. But the seaweed farms, the nice thing about them here in Maine is they go in after Labor Day and they're out before Memorial Day. And right now, in fact, is harvest season here in Maine. And all that 1 million pounds or more that Atlantic Sea Farms will get this year will clear those lines. The lines will come out, and no one will know that they were there.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And the kelp,
The kelp's just cut and then processed. You have to process kelp within 24 hours to make it stable. You can ferment it, you can freeze it, you can dry it, but that has to be done fairly quickly. And so here in Maine, there's a pretty good system of getting that to one place to manage that process. Some of the barriers in other geographies are they have, like Alaska, they have a tremendous amount of potentially scale, but yet there's no easy way to maybe break. It's so far from anywhere. How do you? That's one of the challenges that we're helping to sort of work through up there. And then similarly to in Scandinavia and Norway, in that area, they have boats that will haul the stuff to the docks and stuff like that. But what's interesting to me is that you're leveraging existing infrastructure for this. It's not like it's creating something brand new, right? So we can, cities and towns and waterfronts that are maybe in need of some activity, this is a great way to sort of give that area rebirth and income to some of these coastal communities. And the WWF is really highly focused on sort of communities as well as conservation, and that's where they seem to excel.
So what's fascinating that it's really off season. Really, especially for us here, I guess it's cold water, correct?
Yeah.
It's not going to be in warmer water. Yeah, and it's salt water.
Well, for us, for brown kelp, we're focused on cold water because we know that in deep water we can grow, 10 or 15 feet of kelp in 4 or 5 months. Really get a ton of biomass that way.
I never thought about that as a kid. When the dock went in, all clean, nothing, and then by the end of summer,
you get something. And that's another good benefit of a sea farm is that it produces habitat for things to live within for that period of time, and there's all sorts of work that needs to still be done to study. Are animals coming from away to hide in there, or are we expanding sort of the whole marine system that way? There's still some science that needs to be researched to prove that out one way or the other. But it's I do hear stories of sports fishermen, specifically around shellfish farms, finding the fishing better. And no one wants to admit it because they don't want to tell where the best fishing is, but that's what we hear anecdotally. So fish near the shellfish and seaweed farms. The water's better.
Interesting. I grew up with fishermen, lobstermen, and the question was how is it? And it was never good.
Exactly. Yeah, not catching anything.
Not catching anything. Exactly right. Might be a band a year, but not catching nothing.
Never.
What is the kelp used for?
Right now, it's well, I tell you what it could be used for. And one of the project, so there's three areas we're focused on with WWF. One is sort of the innovation and how we farm better and more efficiently through technology innovation. The second is how do we grow the market, and the third is sort of social license and public acceptance. In the market, to your point, right now there's a lot of use of it for food and pharmaceuticals and stuff like that. And in fact, you probably had kelp in your diet today when you brush your teeth. It's in most every toothpaste. I was just looking at some new vitamins I got, and kelp was part of it, for the iodine or something like that. So it's used in all sorts of various ways. The opportunity for us to bring the cost down for farming and to really scale it offshore, so we can have an alternative to corn and soybeans and terrestrial farming, is really in livestock feed and things like that. Eventually, maybe biofuels, but that's a tremendous amount of scale. Short term, it's more livestock farming.
So how much, you gave me some numbers earlier on production that's being produced now. And I understand you may not know the whole globe's production, but what can it be? What is it? What could it be?
Well, I can't really tell you because I don't know these numbers off the top of my head. But what I do know is that if you look at the past 50 years, sort of farming seaweed is just grown exponentially versus just wild harvest, just going out and sucking rockweed off rocks or whatever, versus actually having a farm and cultivating it. The wild harvest has remained relatively flat over this time, but the farming has just gone crazy. And I was listening to Paul talk to someone yesterday, and he said if this slope continues, in probably 10 or 20 years, seaweed has the potential to be the fourth largest biomass crop behind potatoes, or equal to potatoes. It's just a massive amount of potential for growing, and it's because you can grow seaweed with the reason we like it and the reason WWF is involved is there's no inputs, there's no land conversion, there's no fertilizers. You put these seeded ropes in the water, and they suck up the nutrients, the phosphorus, and produce oxygen and suck up carbon but grow to this huge size in no time. And I think until you sort of see how the magnitude is in a three-dimensional farm, right? Because it's going down, it's going down in every which way. There's huge potential for this to really solve some of our climate, not all. It's not a silver bullet, but to solve some climate challenges.
I have I had a misconception of this before we started. What are some of those misconceptions that you have to deal with and you're
That's a good
working
question.
out?
The biggest it maybe not so much a misconception as much as there are some barriers, and this comes to that in that Venn diagram that we talked about: innovation, market, and social license. In the social license bucket, it's change, right? It's not so much an objection to what it could do, just not in my backyard.
Of course.
And so a lot of what we're trying to do is educate on the value of what near shore or even offshore farming it can be for local communities, because there is such value for not only economically and livelihoods, but also just from a pure ocean health perspective. By doing all that filtering of the water and making the water less acidic, and there's just all this really great ecosystem services that just help.
One of my misconceptions was naively, I envisioned this, plucking off of the rocks of this seaweed and kelp versus it being harvested, which makes it completely sustainable.
Totally.
Yeah.
And just to reiterate, when you put that in the water, you're not burning down any rainforests to do it. You're not plowing any dirt. There's no irrigation. You're not spreading fertilizer on it. It's just completely naturally growing like a weed, which it is.
And I assume different varieties based on probably different locations. We probably in Maine have a different variety than what may be out in Santa Barbara.
It's actually generally the same. What we are doing, though, is a lot of research to understand how heat resistance strains might do better elsewhere. So there's a lot of research. We fund research at Bigelow Labs and Woods Hole to really understand what strains are going to be good where. They've done all this for 300 years in Korea. The trip I missed, I really would have been learning a lot about what they've done to change what strains they grow and how they grow it, and through selective breeding programs. We are doing a lot of work in that area now as an industry, and we funded a lot of that work. Bigelow does. I mean, Woods Hole does a bunch of it. But yeah, we're lucky to have those types of places close by to help us out. Because you can't, the stuff in the Caribbean won't grow up here, and vice versa. And down in the Caribbean, it's very shallow, and it's very much, it's more niche-y stuff that they've got it figured out for a certain market. Up here, where we want to grow deep and fast, that's a different cultivation method.
And who are the farmers? Are they converted from another industry, or where do they come from?
Yeah, we just did a video up in Norway, in Trondheim, Norway, and the guy that was being highlighted actually had migrated from the finfish, from growing salmon all his life in pens, to the seaweed, because he saw how much more sustainable this could be long term. Granted, there's a lot of improvements that have been made in the last 20 years in finfish farming, and that's pretty much all that we eat is farmed fish. But the ability for him to migrate from one to the other, he just sees a huge opportunity of where it's going. And even locally here in Casco Bay, the lobstermen are starting to see that they can do this over the winter months when people aren't around and make up a good chunk of cash that they didn't have before. So it's great supplemental income. They already have the boat. They have the experience of working on the water. They know how to deal with the ocean. It is a bit of a mindset shift to go from sort of fishermen, which is more of a hunter-gatherer mentality, to a farmer, which is more of a cultivation, and there is some challenges there. Sometimes, you have a bad day fishing, you can go back out tomorrow. You have a bad day, bad season, you might be doomed, right, for the season. So there's some learnings that, and Atlantic Sea Farm does a lot of work with the locals, fish, lobster and fishery community to really train them and educate them on how to farm versus hunt, and that's kind of interesting. So there's really interesting long-term opportunities for a lot of different folks.
How much of it is done in shallower waters versus deep water?
I wouldn't be able to give you a number on that.
Yeah, I didn't mean a number, just in general.
But so I wouldn't even be able to guess. But I just know that 90% of the total harvest is still collected in Asia and China and that area in Asia, and that's, I think, relatively low water, not very deep water like you might get in the Faroes or Alaska. The stuff that I've seen in the Faroe Islands is just incredible. It's just really rich, big brown kelp that is 12, 15, 20 feet long, and they've just got good water and good current for it. It's really cool.
So if you're close to shore, I guess maybe the other question was, and it may be the same, but how much of it is done close to shore versus more offshore? And my question is coming to, how have those that are close to shore reacted to this?
So right now it's all done within sort of state limits, generally speaking, except for that farm that I mentioned in Santa Barbara. That's the first sort of federal water license. So seaweed farming is pretty visually uninteresting compared to some other things in the water. And so we're having pretty good luck getting seaweed farms in the water because they go in and they go out. If they stayed in all year, maybe we wouldn't have as much success because, it reminds me of, there was a house in Julia, and I had a friend in Harpswell was trying to sell their house, and it was on the water, and someone came to look at it from out of state, and the comment was made to the realtor that, what are all those buoys out there? And the realtor said, well, those are lobster chops pots, and I guess the potential buyers, well, those will have to go. And the story goes that the realtor said, well, maybe Maine's not the place for you, or at least Harpswell. So, there is this sentiment of not wanting to look at the buoys. Seaweed, I think, doesn't have yes, it has navigation buoys and has buoyancy buoys to hold the harvest up. But again, those are all gone in the summer, and people can sail around them and motor over them. It may be a little bit different. I haven't seen the one in Santa Barbara. It's because they're in heavier traffic. They're going to have some big corner buoys that are a little bit more dramatic, I think. But that makes sense where they're in the shipping traffic. But they're sort of out of the majority of day-to-day activity,
recreational activity as well, probably. Yeah. How about what's the experience been with different industries that are in the same waters? How is that going?
It's you struck on the key part, right? The commons are on a land-based farm, you can go buy land and do whatever you want on it, right? There's just no one's going to tell you no, But in the water, where you have, to your point, all sorts of activity, it requires a lot more sort of process. And the main DMR here has a pretty good process that's lasted 50 years. I mean, they've been at it for a long time. Aquaculture has been around for a long time. Where we end up finding that there's a challenge is it's most likely lack of education, understanding of what is going on. And if you start to look at the science and you can start to share that science, and you start to share the benefits to the community, we hope over time people will start to have less resistance in certain areas. But I'm totally biased. I drank the Kool-Aid. It's an amazing farming opportunity. It's an amazing product, and it's amazing what we can do with it from a climate perspective to improve the ocean's health and reduce our dependence on terrestrial farming over not my lifetime, but maybe our kids and grandkids' lifetime, it will really start to change. And they're the ones that are really starting to see and request and to demand this type of change anyways. They're the ones that are pushing for, how do you source this? How sustainable is it? Terrestrial farming isn't sustainable long term. We just are going to run out of land. And so going to the ocean and figuring this out just makes sense to try to deal with the 10 billion people who will be on this planet before you know it and need food. So they need protein, and we need to figure that out. So it's a bigger issue than just, putting a seaweed farm in Casco Bay and having but at the end of the day, it may be a bigger global issue, but at the end of the day, it's a very local issue because the local community is deciding whether to do it or not. And that's where we think we can help long-term with education and support that.
Is it going to be, or is it currently legislated along the coasts?
Through the DMR. Yeah, if you want to put anything in the water, you have to go through the DMR, and there's a good long process to do that. It's literally a couple of years to sort of go through that process. Part of it is that I feel badly for the DMR. They're understaffed. And so there's only a few people that are trying to process all these applications. That's an area where we could really probably ramp up, to get things growing in Maine a little bit more. But it's if you have the gear. If I were to do it, it would cost a lot of money to try to get a boat, got to get the gear, got to get the lines, got to get the experience. But someone that's been on the water all their life, this is an easy transition for them. That's what we're seeing.
It has a feel of almost being too good to be true. Is that something that you have to overcome?
It almost is that way, right? And that's what got me so excited at the very beginning. There's only been a few products in my life that have gotten me that excited. The other ones, I spent some time in Boston with a blood substitute, and it was just too good to be true. But it was working. I saw it with my own eyes, right? And unfortunately, that company didn't work for all sorts of reasons. But the same is here, right? It's like there's all these great benefits, and it's a matter of helping the general population, general public understand the local value and the bigger picture for humanity, so to speak, of how this could help. And again, it's not going to solve the problems, but it's going to be part of a solution long term. And just touch on the people that I've had the fortune of meeting in the last year. The marine scientists, the PhDs, the people in this sector. It's a fairly small group still where we're working. They're so hopeful and they're so energetic and they're such problem solvers and they're just going after it, right? They're not, it's not a story of icebergs melting and, California burning. The scenery is beautiful. It's underwater, which is beautiful. The visuals are great, but the story still is really rock solid and has so much good from a foundational to launch off of. Yes, there's lots of research that needs to be done to prove out some scaling issues, whether it's farming or sequestration or whatever, but that will come with time. But yeah, it is. I don't think it wouldn't have lasted 300 years on the other side of the planet if it wasn't a good story.
Yeah. And I would say what you're involved with and where it's happening here, pretty entrepreneurial. I mean, these scientists, these PhDs, they're cutting edge.
They are. I mean, Bigelow Labs, Nicole Price, Bigelow. I mean, these are smart people that have done a lot of work to get to where they are from a science perspective and getting their PhD and getting journals published and Gulf of Maine Research Institute, those types of folks, Island Institute folks. There's a lot of great people in Maine that are working to help the fishing industry adopt new markets and tools to a changing environment that they face every day, more than you and I probably really appreciate.
So WWF, how do they find a project like this and say, this is where we want to spend our time and resources? Because I'm assuming there's a
long list.
You mentioned it's the panda.
Yeah.
The DC panda.
The panda. The way that this all came about is my boss, Paul Dobbins, who was the first seaweed farmer in, I believe, North America and started here in Maine. He had sort of retired, and then the company became Atlantic Sea Farms. But he retired for what ended up being only a couple months, and then the World Bank, someone at the World Bank or the Panda called him and said, "Can you do a landscapes sort of overview of the market?" And I know what it was. It was the Grantham Foundation. Mr. Grantham himself felt that seaweed was one of the solutions to climate change. And he really wanted a landscape scan of what's going on. So Paul spent a couple of years doing laps around the world, visiting farms and sort of getting to know who's who. From that, we got a grant from the Bezos Earth Fund, which Paul pretty much had already come up with a list of the projects and the people he wanted to help sort of get going. And so with the Bezos Earth Fund grant, he was able to quickly deploy sort of a lot of that funding to get it in the field. So we're working right now within a grant that ends in November 24. So that a lot of that money has already been deployed. So we're not sort of looking right now for new things, except for maybe if we get refunded or someone, if the Bisson family wants to write another $10 million check, that's fine. So
that's why we're here today.
That's
right?
why we're here today. So there's the projects of, we get asked all the time, how, can we fund something? But right now, everything is measured against the Bezos objectives, which is, will it help us get seaweed farms in the water? Will it help raise public sentiment? And will it do, a couple other things, that are on our metrics sheet? And if it does, then we're likely to support it or to do that. I might add, though, at the same time now, we're doing much more impact investments. So we've got the grants that are sort of one lever, and then we have impact investing, which is another, and we have investments in 3 companies. I think we were the first big, as they call it, big international NGO, the first bingo to make an impact investment in a private company. So we have investments in the Faroe Islands, top of Norway, and Oban, Scotland, for different companies for different reasons. And that gives us a little bit a different leverage than a grant might to really move things along.
So really, someone with Maine roots, Paul, is the one that what they were contacting to get this started.
Yeah. So he was at IDEX with us for 10 years, and then he left there and became this farmer. He wanted to really, he saw Maine and other coastal communities being sort of deteriorating, and he's always had a fishing sort of background and really wanted to do something to, how do we teach new skills and find new ways to keep the working waterfront going long term? And this really fit that. And I just read the other day, I think it was the Island Institute, that says 20 miles of Maine's entire coastline is working waterfront. And that includes either just a little walking path down for a clamor to a flat to Portland Harbor, where they have a pier and stuff like that. So there's not much land left in Maine that is devoted to working waterfront, yet that is our brand, right?
Yeah.
And if we keep closing that out, the reason people come here for the working waterfront, the scenic working, that scene,
and those lobster traps out in front of
it's going to be gone.
House.
Those lobster traps, maybe it's going to be a different place. Will it look, like a lake scene, where there's just nothing out there and it's just water? And maybe that's what the people that are driving the economics of buying properties want. But I think down at the root of it's not.
No, I don't think so. And to put it in perspective, so it's 20 miles of coastline.
20 miles.
I mean,
out of 3,000.
3,000. Yeah.
More than 3,000.
It's more than 3,000 when you figure it out. So it's a very small amount.
I think, I'd have to double check this. You have to fact check me, but I think under about 1,800 to 2,000 acres of state water is licensed to aquaculture, whether that's a seaweed farmer or a fish pen. That's about twice the size of, I think, Portland Jetport, or almost the size of Bangor International Airport footprint. It's not a lot. And Maine controls, I think it's the license, it's 3 miles out that we control, and then it's federal water. So there's a lot that could maybe eventually, long time from now, be offshore, but the technology is not quite there yet.
The not in my backyard, kind of, we touched on that a little bit. How is that going to develop, do you think?
I don't know.
Yeah.
All I know is that we can continue to educate with science on the value of having these farms in the water, and hopefully by continuing to educate harbor masters and real estate agents, for example, and others that can be supportive of the value that a farm has to filter that water. Runoff from our land is killing our oceans, right? So this is a way to help try to improve that, create habitat for marine species. There's all this great benefit by having these farms around that will benefit the landowners, and so it really comes down to just trying to do as much as we can to show the benefit of those farms there in the water, whether they're for the winter or whether they're there more year round, like a shellfish farm might be.
How much of this is used in food? I mean, wrong question. In the food that would we go to a restaurant and have some kelp in our meal?
I don't know the percentages, but it's a lot more places than you realize. And we love going to Flatbread because they have a salad with seaweed on it, and we've had that for years before I even thought about doing this job. Atlantic Sea Farm has a great portfolio of products that they have now that they market to all sorts of different retail and wholesale locations. There's a group in it's the opportunity, I think, Rick, that's important. Paul and I were talking about a visit he had last week in Scotland, I think it was, or Ireland, and they found a burger that was 25% kelp and 75% meat. And he said he couldn't taste the kelp, but think of the change in terrestrial farming. And granted, this is hypothetical, but if you took all 60 billion burgers that are eaten in the U.S. Every year and replaced 25% with kelp, it would be a huge benefit to the terrestrial farming conservation efforts to save the property, save those things, and it's all sustainable, right? So it's when you come back to it, it's the no inputs. It's helping the ocean. It's just, to your point, it sounds too good to be true, but there are just so many benefits that can help. And the other thing we talk about a lot is trade-offs. Where it's not one or the other. It's not like we're saying eat kelp, not beef. It's right. If there's a way to reduce the impact of beef on the climate and have a healthy ocean, and it doesn't impact your taste, that seems like a no-brainer as well. But this is a generational shift. We're not thinking that we can change. One, it wouldn't scale that fast. It's just not physically possible, I don't think. But it's changing people's diets and preferences is not easy. I was watching a YouTube this morning. It was Rick Lindell from Woods Hole, and he was saying, how many of you in this audience didn't have avocados 40 years ago, right? It's like, and kale. Yeah. And now it's, I can't not go grab an avocado.
I had
avocado
get mad
when they're over $1.
Yeah. And
right?
if you'd asked me 2 years ago, if I was going to eat avocado, absolutely not.
Exactly. Maybe some guacamole, but not a plain avocado or kale. And so there's a lot of learning of how to use it in food. But as we talked about earlier, food isn't, human food is certainly the top of the pyramid of uses, but it's not going to be what brings the cost down. You got to start at the bottom to get the cost down to really make it inclusive. And that's where the feed comes in and for livestock. We were lucky to go to see some piglet farms that have been trying a fermented feed product. And these farmers were telling us that the piglets, they're having lower mortality rate with the piglets. The sows are producing more milk, which are then producing, feeding the piglets better. So the whole sort of farm system was better, and they were able to reduce the total protein they fed the piglets and the pigs by using this product by a substantial amount. And that is really intriguing also to the WWF. So if you can reduce the amount of protein being fed to some livestock, poultry or pigs, that's just taking the pressure off the terrestrial farming again, right? So it's all about, that's sort of the lens we look through. And it was only something like one 1/1000th of their diet as far as the volume. It's really small, but the fact that they fermented it with rapeseed and some other magic pixie dust really made a difference.
Yeah.
So
the pixie dust, that's what makes the difference.
yeah, we came home with some and they said, just put it in your yogurt and put it in your smoothies. And yeah, it was definitely pig feed. It hadn't been sort of curated for the human consumption.
The human appetite.
Yeah.
So shifting a little bit back towards, you mentioned pivot earlier in your career change. So you have brothers.
Yep. 3 of them.
3 brothers. And what I've noticed about the Paige family is somewhere, somehow came a interest in the world and making the world a better place. And just curious about kind of for you or for the family, where that kind of comes from.
I think it would have to come from our parents.
Hmm.
You know, we were fortunate that they were very early adopters of sustainability practices when we lived in Massachusetts. I think the first community farm, I don't know in the geography, but Lincoln had a community farm. And so there was a chance to go down and have your own crop there or buy from that community farm. So we've always been sort of exposed to that and understand the connection between our food systems and our actions. And, you know, our mom continues to be a farmer's market, you know, attendee pretty regularly. And, you know, my dad was raising sheep before he died. So on the land, it's been, I think that type of humility or for humanity, it has to do with, it's not just all about us, right? There's more than just us that are being impacted by these food decisions. And we have to be conscious of that. It's a big issue, and it's going to take all of us to sort of change a little bit and accommodate. Again, it comes back to choices. It's not like you do this or that. It's sort of like a little bit of this and a little bit of that. Compromise along the way can, I think, get you pretty far.
So, and along that line of, you know, you look at your career and where you've been at, they've all been maybe somewhat local, but they've had a world impact.
Yeah, I never looked at it that way, but that's true. I mean, IDEX for sure started back in '89, and Dave Shaw is like, we're going to be the world leader in animal diagnostics. And a lot of people were like, yeah, Dave, that's fine. Let's just get the work done today. We got to worry about. And sure enough, here we are, right? IDEX is one of, if not still, the largest diagnostic company for animal health in the globe. And it's taken us, so we vote. And yeah, it's the global perspective. We are in a very beautiful part of the world, but there's whole other, there's so much out there that it still impacts everybody else that we have to keep in mind.
Yeah. So back and on the pivot again. So what advice would you have for someone who is just getting started in their career in the new sort of global world? How would you?
Well, that's a good question. It may have been different before the pandemic than it is now, for sure. But you have to, I think looking where I am now, someone said it's my dharma to be where I am. It's a really good fit based on 30 years of discovery, right? If you can figure out where you want to be early, just run with it, right? You know, if you're comfortable and you're happy and it's working, go for it. I don't think I was sort of a generalist in certain ways that benefited me. That benefits the way my brain works or doesn't work. So it's a way that networking is everything, you know. And I the more people you can meet and learn about what they're doing and how what you're doing fits into that, just is also good, because you never know when you might sort of need the next sort of jump. Our dad used to always say, be nice to them on the way up because you'll pass them on the way down. And I always remember that when I would leave. I left IDEX 3 times and went back. And I just, you just have to make sure that you leave things in good shape with anybody you're doing business with, because you never know when that may come back, especially in a small town like Maine, right?
Yeah.
It's really important. And it's, but follow as much as you can what you really enjoy doing. And I was lucky to be in a position where we had sold our house, thanks to you guys. We had moved to California, moved back. Our kids had launched. and we're taxpayers. So we had an opportunity to be able to pivot and change my career without a whole lot of contemplation. And so we were in a really lucky spot to be able to do that. If it had been 10 years ago, I probably wouldn't have made the change because I would have been so in the moment and trying to make things happen, and it probably wouldn't have happened. So I'm really fortunate. I'm really grateful that it happened when it did.
Yeah. So to the person who's maybe in their 60s and all of a sudden, for whatever reason, they're now out of work, what would you say to them about starting again?
We have a lot of experience that is very valuable, whether it's management experience, technical experience, what have you, and don't discount that. I think that there's the companies that those people that find themselves in that situation need to be looking for innovative and open, not just in Maine, but anywhere, because it is a global market right now. You can work from Maine and be working for a California company or me for DC and travel down there once now and then. But the experience that a 60-year-old has of managing people or managing projects is very different than someone that's just a few years out of school. Not saying that those ideas that someone out of school isn't going to be helpful, but the perspective that we can bring and life experiences we can bring to a particular problem or situation is very different. And I think that is sometimes overlooked, like, oh, it's just an old guy looking for a job. But there's a lot of skills in those people that generally I think are really valuable in places, especially if it's a younger company. Bring in someone that's got this experience. People at our age aren't trying to. It's not a foot race necessarily to be the next CEO, right? It's we just want to keep working because we enjoy it, and and if it's a good mission, we can be pretty passionate about it and give you more time than anyone on the team, right? And that's so. If you find yourself in a situation where you're been downsized or want to change, there's plenty of opportunity there in this market, in this global market. It just takes time. And as I said, I was lucky. I wasn't looking. The only looking that I was doing was I was trying to find a way to do more international work from within VCA, which was owned then by Mars, and had some. So we were starting to do some projects more from overseas. We joked that I sort of over manifested that international experience or desire, but that's okay. We're having what a great time to be doing it when we can still move around and do a red eye now and then and not be completely dead the next day.
So tell us where you're going. Where do your travels take you next?
We're going to go. Some of the project work we're doing next is up in Alaska to document and work with the media on the largest single farm harvest, which will be in early May, and then there'll be some work. So that particular project supports two things. One, it's a harvest, but also Bigelow Labs has got some equipment up in that farm to measure carbon and nutrients and health of the ocean near it and control nearby. And they have farms around the world that are doing that. So that's part of the update. And then we'll go, we're going to do some work in the UK and then Norway. There's a conference. We'll visit that. We also have an investment in a company up in Norway, so probably some visit with those folks. And then one of the other projects that I'm really passionate about is in Portugal, and it's a restoration group that's doing kelp reforestation. And we talked about earlier about seeding a line for a grow line. You can also do the same thing. Instead of sticking the rope in the magic juice with all this baby seaweed, you can put rocks in and pebbles. And so what they're doing is taking those rocks, those seeded rocks, and sprinkling them in areas where kelp is declining or declined, and helping to reestablish those kelp beds, because big kelp beds like giant kelp and along Portugal coast are such great sort of they diffuse the waves a little bit, and they just help for all sorts of reasons, habitat and wave diffusion, and of course the nutrients that they suck up. So we're going to go work with them, because their thing is a container nursery, which they want to work with different municipalities around the world, bring their nursery and set it up and get the right strain, and then grow the green gravel and put it out in out in the ocean.
Hmm.
So that's sort of where we're headed short term, and then we'll have a couple months here in Maine. Who wants to leave Maine in July and August, right?
Yes.
Not many people.
I'm going to be here.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly right.
Yeah. So we'll hang out on the New Meadows and
nice.
eat a lot of oysters.
Yeah.
I think there's 11 farms in the New Meadows. We should make it our point to try to hit every one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do people learn more about what you're doing at WWF and other parts of WWF if they want to get involved?
You can just Google WWF seaweed program and you'll land on our landing page. I don't have a fancy vanity URL, but the WWF is pretty easily searchable for that.
Very easy.
And I can give you a couple links to put in your post if
That'd
you want. We just launched a series of FAQs with our program officer, and she answers a half a dozen questions really succinctly, and it's a great way to sort of understand the basics. And that's on YouTube as well.
Great. And if they want to get involved, same thing?
They can certainly obviously donate to WWF or just look and buy seaweed products and experiment and in the grocery store. We had, I found some dulse the other day at Morning Glory and chopped it up and put it in scrambled eggs, and it was really quite good.
What was it?
Dulse. It's I can't remember where in the Maine coast it comes from, but it's a red seaweed and it's shorter than kelp. Or try some of the Atlantic Sea Farm products. Try kelp other than what's in your toothpaste or your vitamins, and see how it goes. Just like you get to know your oyster farmer, and you like to, I like a Damascus oyster versus another oyster. Same thing will start to happen, I think, with some of those kelp farmers. And just go on Instagram and look for seaweed farmers on the coast of Maine, and you'll come up with probably 30 farms you can follow and start to understand how to get some of their product raw or dried and do what you want. But until people start to engage with it more and more, like an avocado, that's just part of where we just need people to engage with it like that. Yeah.
Anything else that you'd like to bring forward that we didn't talk about?
No, I get. Well, we talked earlier about sort of real estate agents and their ability to help the potential buyers understand the value of aquaculture. Whether it's, and mostly when I talk about aquaculture, I'm focused only on low trophic, which is the things you don't feed, like oysters and mussels and seaweed. Maybe there's a way to help provide them with context, and because there's again a lot of value that they could communicate to coastal community residents and potential residents on why a farm is where it is.
So low trophic is
something you don't feed.
You don't feed. Oysters, mussels,
very bottom
kelp.
of the food chain.
Okay.
Yep. So
they're feeding off the ocean.
They're feeding off the nutrients in the ocean.
In the ocean, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're not doing anything other than just putting them in the water. And I mean, there's more to it than
watching the time.
Yeah. The oyster farmers would say that's not true, but you got to turn them and you got to clean them and you got to sort them and all. But from a feed perspective, there's nothing. It's been fascinating to be within WWF. It opens your eyes to all sorts of challenges we face. So much, even the finfish aquaculture is fed by land-based protein, and even they're fishing bait to then put in these pens. There's just this whole crazy system to create our food, right? And when you start to look at it objectively, it can be a little bit, wow, that seems like an awful lot of work to get a piece of protein. And if you look, I'll give you a link also for something that Scott Lindell provided us from that shows the relative inputs, resources used for different protein sources. And at the top is seaweed, where it's almost beneficial. So the line goes the opposite direction. Then it goes to shellfish, which is barely anything showing on the line. But you talk about energy and fertilizers and irrigation and all these things. And at the very bottom, of course, is the livestock. It just uses a tremendous amount of resources to grow your burger. And if there's a way that we can help people understand that visual and understand that a choice with a kelp enhanced or hybrid burger down the road will be good for the planet and good for your health, because there's also so much good in the kelp itself, nutritionally.
Yeah, nutritionally. If you could just touch on that a little bit.
I don't think I'm the right guy just to know that.
But protein is there?
It is protein, and there's all these other things in it that are good for you. I think iodine and some other stuff. There's some great nutritional value in seaweed that has been proven, obviously, for 300 or 400 years on the other side of the planet. And Paul talks about visits he's made in sort of northern hemisphere where you go talk to some of the old folks of the town, and they're like, oh yeah, we'll go down and grab seaweed and put it in this, or we'll put it in that. And so they know, we know intuitively that there's a lot of good value in seaweed. So, it's the new kelp. It's the new kale. Yeah, sort of, kind of.
Good. Yeah, that's great.
It just takes time to change behavior. It's not easy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, you're a changer in the world, so appreciate that very much.
I'm one little piece.
Yeah, exactly right. Well, thanks very much for being on. Great conversation, and we will put some show notes in there so people can learn more. And
I'll overdo it. You take what you want.
Okay, and keep up the good work.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Do what we can.
Yeah.